You and I know never to judge a uniform, but the CEO only learned this from a security tape. The late-night alert hit Sloane Decker's phone at 11:43 p.m. She was instantly in her car, speeding down Michigan Avenue within 7 minutes. The corporate tower's after-hours security system had been rerouted straight to her 8 months ago, after a night guard was caught sneaking files out in a gym bag. The main security desk received nothing. Kirk Ebeling never even knew the rerouting existed. Sloane unlocked the ground floor security booth, stepping inside to pull up that newly flagged video footage. Camera cluster 34th floor, 11:31 p.m. She hit play. A man wearing a simple blue janitor uniform stood over the darkened conference table. His badge read G. Voss. He wasn't cleaning. He had opened his personal laptop, not corporate hardware, typing with fast, absolute precision in the dark. His fingers danced like they only do when thousands of hours have made the movement totally unconscious. No searching. Zero hesitation. She leaned in, zooming on the screen. Poor resolution, a bad angle, but enough. A complex, layered financial analysis spreadsheet. The brilliant kind of work the invisible man in the uniform was doing at 11:30 Wednesday night. 90 seconds later, he saved his work, grabbed the mop, and started cleaning in slow, even strokes, pretending those genius 90 seconds had never even happened. Sloane opened the man's personnel file. Garrett Voss. Facilities maintenance, contracted directly by Midwest Facility Services. No college degree shown, blank work history, no emergency contacts. Just one short note from Patsy Crow, the cleaning supervisor. Reliable, good work, an empty file daring us to look closer. She typed the janitor's name into the internal search engine and waited. The glowing screen revealed a hidden truth she never expected. The next morning, Garrett pushed his mop in slow arcs across the 34th floor, head down, earbud in, blending away. He had worn this disguise for 6 months, and he'd gotten incredibly good at the quiet stillness required to make people view you as nothing more than furniture. Less than plain wallpaper, beneath the potted ficus by the elevators that the corporate suits never actually looked at. You become entirely invisible. You become nothing but the quiet, ambient hum of a building maintaining itself. Yet beneath the work shirt he was a different man once. He used to wear expensive suits, leading meetings on this very floor, speaking with a sharp genius that made everyone else go completely quiet. At 35 he understood his true value, knowing exactly where his successful life was heading. Until a freezing February night stole Rachel from him out on an icy stretch of Interstate 90. The brilliant life he knew packed itself away, hidden somewhere deep where he simply couldn't find it anymore. He still remembered that cold waiting room at Northwestern Memorial. His son Owen was 2 years old, tiny enough to sleep with his little cheek pressed tightly against Garrett's warm neck. His weight warm and solidly trusting, the way only very young children can trust you completely. Without reservation, completely blind to the agonizing darkness we adults are secretly navigating every day. The exhausted doctor finally came out. Garrett saw the tragic truth in his eyes, proving the heaviest burdens are the ones nobody sees. I never cried. I just held my son Owen a bit tighter, breathing through the pain, like bracing for a storm you know you can't stop. That was 5 long years ago. Since then I've learned exactly how to carry the weight alone. I stopped my cleaning cart right outside the main glass conference room. Inside, CEO Sloane Decker sat at the head table, listening to Kirk Ebeling present the latest quarterly financial report. The glowing screen behind Kirk displayed a perfect, spotless cascade of corporate numbers. Balanced and highly convincing. You and I both know numbers look great when someone carefully hides the bad ones. I stared at those figures. I built this company's financial architecture with my own hands. I designed the whole system. I wrote the core formulas quietly running beneath every single spreadsheet Kirk was presenting. I know what truly healthy profits look like. I also know a financial cover-up when I see one. These were definitely fake. Kirk was mid-sentence when his eyes suddenly drifted out toward the glass wall. He locked onto me. We stared at each other for exactly 1 second, not a moment more. His expression remained totally blank. He turned back to his presentation without missing a step, though his thumb lingered on the remote clicker just a heartbeat too long. I lowered my head and pushed the cleaning cart onward. The invisible countdown started in my head. Kirk absolutely recognized me. The real question wasn't if, it was only when. After my shift ended, my supervisor Patsy cornered me down in the basement supply room. She was a tough, broad-shouldered woman in her late 50s, with a weathered face. A face that had seen plenty of hardship and certainly hadn't softened from it. She handed me a folded note. "The big boss asked about you today," she muttered. "Wanted to know your name." I grabbed the paper, scanned it, and shoved it deep into my pocket. "You're not scared?" Patsy asked. "I knew this day would come," I told her. "I planned for it." Patsy stared at me for a really long moment. She gave me that look, like she was doing complex math in her head, and the final answer just wasn't adding up right. Finally, she grabbed her heavy clipboard and marched right back into the hallway. Sloane was already staring at my archived personnel file when I stepped inside her office the very next morning. She didn't bother using human resources to summon me. She never even had her personal assistant call down. Instead, she rode down to the lobby herself and asked Patsy, who just measured the CEO with a hard stare before nodding to send me upstairs. I walked in wearing my invisible blue janitor uniform, smelling faintly of cheap bleach. I'm a tall guy, built thick from years of manual labor instead of a fancy gym. And my face was weathered rough enough that you could never easily guess my real age. I scanned her pristine office with a dead calm that clearly put her on edge. She didn't offer me a chair. "Last night," she began. 11:31, the main conference room upstairs. "What were you doing?" "Just checking something," I replied. "Checking what?" "Something this company is losing." "Now stick with me here." She spun the laptop around. My janitor file wasn't on that screen. She finally dug up my old employment record late last night, buried deep inside their archived personnel system. A restricted database needing CEO access, places she hadn't bothered checking once in the 2 years since she took the big job. The file simply read, "Garrett Voss, Senior Forensic Financial Analyst, Decker Meridian Group, January 2010 to 2021. Flawless reviews. I left voluntarily to raise my kid alone." She stared at my photo, 11 years younger but still the same face. I stared back at her screen, showing absolutely zero surprise. She knew right then I had been waiting for this. "You worked here," she said, "for 11 years. You left in 2021. You came back in March through a facilities subcontractor, which is why your name didn't appear in our standard HR search. The archived record only surfaces if you dig into the legacy storage system. Kirk Ebeling has no access to that layer." She paused. "So you picked your entry point carefully." "The only way back in that didn't give him a legal basis to remove me," I said. "I'm a contracted employee of Midwest Facility Services. He can't fire me from a job I'm not technically employed by his company to do. He can recommend the contract be terminated. He could, but doing that visibly, without documented cause, after I've just re-entered his orbit, that's the kind of move that creates paper trails and invites questions. Kirk doesn't like questions." Sloane studied me closely. "You're still terminated," she said, "effective today." "That's your right," I said. I didn't argue, I didn't move. "Before you do that, I'd ask you to open the left-hand drawer of your desk." She looked right at me. I held her gaze, perfectly calm and steady. Slowly, she looked down at the drawer. She pulled it open. Inside sat a small black USB drive I had planted. I spent 40 minutes cleaning her office that morning, just an invisible dad working. Meanwhile, she was pacing the hallway, totally distracted by a department head call on her phone. I knew her routine perfectly because her schedule was posted right on the shared calendar, completely open to us invisible facilities guys for access planning. I had slipped the drive inside while she was out. "The file is named Ebeling Q3 Variance 2024, I said. "You have 10 minutes to decide whether you want to plug it in." I walked out and shut the door behind me. She actually plugged it in. It took her 45 minutes to read through all the financial evidence I provided. She read the whole thing twice. By her second read of that final page, the office windows had gone totally dark and her coffee had been sitting dead cold for a solid hour. "You and I know the numbers weren't complicated, once you looked closely. Over the past 8 long months, $4.2 million bled from Decker Meridian's operating funds through a web of transactions kept intentionally small, slipping right under the automatic reporting thresholds. That corporate fraud money bounced through 4 intermediate accounts, finally landing inside 3 Delaware shell companies. A very standard choice for hiding. Easy to build, but almost impossible to trace without the exact starting coordinates. Stick with me, you'd never see the whole picture from just one account or reporting period. You and I know you can only spot a lie by seeing the whole picture at once. If you knew the corporate network well enough to see exactly where gaps shouldn't exist. I had known. Because I designed that corporate infrastructure myself years ago. I wrote the original account mapping back in 2012. I knew exactly where to look because long before this uniform I hid the keys. Upstairs, she grabbed her phone to call the company's general counsel, only voicemail. She tried again, busy signal. She set her phone face down, pressing her hands flat against the cool mahogany desk, and carefully weighed what that terrible silence truly meant for her. Her rival Kirk had haunted Decker for 16 years. He'd stood by her father when the empire was just starting out. He was there for every major corporate turning point. His signature was on more massive accounts than she could ever hope to track. He had deep roots with at least 3 board members, powerful people who trusted his word way more than they trusted hers. In any crisis, they would blindly follow his lead before she even had a chance to speak. Any alarm she raised would route straight to Kirk before reaching anyone who could actually help. She felt that awful truth settle heavy into her bones. The unique, suffocating loneliness of sitting at the top, only to realize the entire corporate foundation is completely rigged against you. Let's think about this together. She debated doing absolutely nothing, just letting the corrupt machine keep running. To find some quiet, easy exit through the official channels, praying the rotten system wouldn't swallow her whole. But she knew better. That dead phone line proved it entirely. Driving home in total silence, she stopped at the red light at Michigan and Van Buren, staring blankly through the busy intersection, until her gaze finally drifted to a coffee shop across the street. That's where I was, sitting by the window in my uniform, my little boy hunched over his notebook beside me, his little tongue poking out, completely lost in his own world, sketching with slow, careful little strokes. I watched him the way a single father looks at his reason for breathing, giving him my quiet, total attention, blocking out everything else. No fake smiles, no performance for the corporate crowd. Just an invisible dad loving his kid. The light flipped, a horn blared behind her. She hit the gas and drove right through the intersection. But something in her mind finally snapped into clarity. She stopped wondering what the invisible janitor was really after. She realized true value lies where no one sees it. Why would a man choose the harder path when a simple payout exists? We have to ask ourselves, what kind of love makes the hardest choice the only option? The very next morning, she told Patsy Crow to set up a meeting in my territory, the basement supply room, at noon. Right when the bottom floors go completely dead, no explanation offered. Patsy studied her for a moment with measuring eyes, then nodded and promised to handle it. I was sitting on an old plastic crate when she arrived. Brown paper lunch bag beside me. I stood up, smoothing out my janitor's uniform. She waved me back down, leaning against the cold metal shelving right across from me. Arms crossed. In this uniform, I'm just part of the industrial cleaner and cold concrete. You have what you need on that drive, the CEO whispered. Your NDA expired in January. Why not go straight to the SEC? I slowly set my sandwich down. I stayed quiet for a long moment. Not the silence of hesitation. I was struggling to voice a massive secret I never really planned to explain out loud. In 2019, I finally answered. I found the first anomalies. Strange financial patterns buried deep inside the operating expense allocations. The kind of corporate fraud you and I would only catch by overlapping 18 months. And hunting for exactly what shouldn't be hidden there. I documented everything and reported it up the corporate ladder. Kirk was COO back then. Not CFO. I paused, remembering. 2 weeks later, they dragged me into a conference room. Kirk was sitting right there alongside 2 expensive outside lawyers. My NDA was already drafted. The exact severance payout had already been coldly calculated. The entire trap was set before the meeting even began. I looked down at my rough hands, resting them perfectly flat against my work pants. It's the quiet posture you learn when forced to swallow your pride just to survive. My wife Rachel died 4 months before that ambush. Owen was only 2. I was the only thing standing between my son and absolute ruin. I stated it without any self-pity, just delivering a cold reality I had fully accepted as a single dad. I signed the 3-year term. Sloane nodded. Expect January 1st of this year. But that whistleblower evidence I gathered back in 2019, Kirk's executives scrubbed it entirely. I secretly checked the network before returning here in March. Every single file was gone. Walking straight into the SEC with just my word was suicide. With zero proof, his legal team would absolutely destroy me in one preliminary hearing. I needed fresh insider evidence pulled directly from their system. Traceable and completely legally airtight. I finally looked up at her. And I needed someone with executive access I clearly don't possess. Me, she said softly, and it definitely wasn't a question. Someone holding CEO-level system credentials. And someone I knew for sure wasn't part of the corrupt network Kirk built. You could have come to me directly. I became CEO in 2022. If you had walked into my office back then and explained this massive cover-up, I would have listened. You really would have, I agreed. And then you would have immediately called the general counsel. And that exact call would have reached Kirk before you even finished dialing. Sloane had absolutely nothing to say. She had tried making that exact phone call just last night, and discovered the channel was entirely blocked by Kirk's massive institutional presence, just voicemail. The dead air. The terrifying realization that every formal corporate path ran directly through his loyalists. Tied directly to a powerful man with 16 years of deep corporate relationships. What else do you need, she asked me. One more thing. A few more days. She pushed off from the metal shelving and slowly nodded. I grabbed my cold sandwich while she quietly walked back through my supply room and marched up the concrete stairwell toward the main building, leaving me behind. But you and I know true value always lies in what no one sees. You ever notice how corporate panic looks? With her, it wasn't dread. Something else took over. 3 days later, Kirk got a silent IT alert at his executive desk. Someone breached their corporate archive storage, and they used CEO login credentials. The access logs showed a solid 41-minute session looking at financial records from 2019 through 2021. I bet he sat there, staring at that computer screen for a long time. Then his mind jumped to the invisible janitor he saw outside his glass conference room. The dead calm on my face when our eyes locked. The way I studied the financial numbers projected on the slide behind him, reading data he assumed a guy in a uniform couldn't understand. He marched down to the corporate cafeteria that very afternoon and found my supervisor, Patsy, eating lunch in the corner. He sat across from her, keeping his tone nice and casual. The new cleaner on floor 34, he asked. Is Voss working out? Best cleaner I have had in years, she told him, not looking up. Why? Just a routine check, Kirk lied, making sure the facilities crew is solid. That same evening, he had IT lock down the security permissions for our contractor badges from Midwest Facility Services. My key card suddenly wouldn't go anywhere above the dark basement level. The system note just claimed it was an updated security protocol restructuring. Nothing to trigger an audit, nothing pointing back to his office. I figured it out when my badge flashed red at the elevator, right as my cleaning shift ended. Stick with me here. I didn't flinch, just stared at the metal doors. Then I turned and headed for the stairs. Kirk was hovering down in the basement, pretending he wasn't waiting for me, just lingering around, like he was simply passing by the utility closets. I ignored the man until he finally spoke up. Garrett, he said, it has been a while. I kept my back turned. Mr. Evelyn, I replied. He kept going. I know your agreement expired. His voice was smooth and polite. I know you are planning something. But you have zero proof. Otherwise you wouldn't be here scrubbing my floors. The elevator dinged. My card got rejected again, a silent red light. He stepped inside. The doors slid shut between us. 2 days later, a certified letter showed up at my tiny apartment on the south side. A heavy legal threat from the expensive law firm that handled Kirk's messes, claiming I might be stealing their highly classified corporate trade secrets. They didn't make one specific charge. That paper was just meant to scare me, not actually sue me. To remind a working single dad exactly how much he had to lose. I read it at the kitchen table while my son Owen ate cereal. He was drawing on a worksheet between bites. I folded up the threat, tossed it on the counter, and started making my own breakfast. I sent Sloane a text. Kirk sent a legal threat. He's getting desperate. Give me 48 hours. She read it during a finance meeting. We know what's coming. She stared right at Kirk. I emptied bins while Kirk explained the depreciation schedule, flashing that smooth confidence of a man who assumed the janitor couldn't understand a single word. I watched him look up, meeting Sloane's eyes with that practiced, slick smile. The fake warmth of an executive who decided long ago she was completely manageable. Sloane smiled right back. 48 hours. Stick with me here. The second basement garage was usually dead by 9 p.m. Zero cameras, no corporate traffic once my night cleaning crew finished up at 8. Sloane was already waiting. When I got down there, car window rolled completely down. I slipped her a flash drive. This isn't financial data, I told her. She flipped open her laptop on the passenger seat and plugged it right in. The laptop screen lit up with the security feed outside the 35th floor's backup server room. Timestamp 11:19 p.m. The exact same Wednesday night she had caught me working on floor 34. The hallway was completely dead, and then Kirk Ebeling stepped off the elevator in a dark coat, holding a device. He marched right to the server access panel down the hall and plugged it in. He waited 30 seconds, unplugged it, and walked right back to the elevator. 45 seconds total. The timestamp was crisp, clear, and absolutely undeniable. Sloane watched the clip twice. The second time around, she paused it right on Kirk's smug, waiting face. Totally unhurried, knowing the routine. How did you get this? She asked. Wednesday nights. The overnight security guard falls asleep right after 11 p.m. I've tracked his routine for 3 months straight. I slipped into the booth and watched the archived tape right on his monitor. I couldn't download it. Just a dad in a uniform, no credentials, no official way to pull it. I stayed quiet, but you can using a formal CEO pull, she realized. Logged deep inside the system. An ironclad chain of custody, straight from the company's own infrastructure. Nobody can say it's fake. She sat there in total silence for a second. And the night you were on camera, floor 34, I just let my silence answer. You picked that room, she whispered. You chose that exact angle on purpose. I had to trigger an event recorded by this building's own internal system. The exact same system, night, and digital timestamp chain that caught Kirk red-handed. If I'm visible on camera at 11:31 and Kirk at 11:19, both pulled from one unbroken system log, then absolutely nobody can claim the Kirk footage was selectively edited or completely faked. It becomes one rock-solid piece of evidence pulled from a single source. Sloane stared at me. You and I know true value isn't the uniform, it's being thorough. I had used the very network Kirk thought he owned right back against him. But I still needed her to officially find the footage. Using her own executive access, because that was the only way custody held up. You used me, she finally said. I needed someone with top access I don't have, and they had to be clean. How did you know I was? June. The Q2 board presentation. I was watching the security feeds, same routine, different night. You paused on page 31 of the appendix, operating expense variance breakdown. You asked Kirk about line 47, I just paused. That's the exact line I flagged in 2019. No one stops there without knowing what to look for. I watched her relive that old meeting. She'd felt those numbers were off. Kirk had played it smooth and she dropped it. But watching her now, I could tell she never truly let it go. Invisible guys notice things, it showed. He answered well, she sighed. He always does, Garrett replied. The real point is you stopped. Garrett stared her down. Someone inside doesn't stop. An insider already knows the actual answer. The executive parking garage felt quiet. Just me and the building's nighttime hum, vents breathing, empty elevators resting, a massive structure keeping itself alive while my little girl slept at home. So what now, she asked. We build the package, he answered. Her empty office at 10 p.m. looked totally different, empty, those bright overhead lights flipped off. Just one desk lamp burning. Outside those rich glass windows, the city faded into cold, dark, geometric shadows. She sat directly across from Garrett at that small table near the glass. They had 2 laptops open, stacking their secret documentation in careful, deliberate order. I wiped the glass, spotting transaction records and Delaware Shell Company registrations on screen. That deep cash flow analysis Garrett built secretly for 6 months on his personal laptop using public filings, cross-referencing source data across 4 hidden corporate accounts. You and I know how the rich hide their mess. The digital threads linking things meant to stay hidden. Sloane even used her CEO access to pull security footage from floors 34 and 35. Everything properly timestamped and formally logged into the system as an administrative pull. Every single piece checking and anchoring the next. "Walk me through the archive access," I heard Garrett say. He had the server path scribbled down on a notepad. Exchange Archive Calendar Year 2019 main account. Searching his email for outbound external forwards. Addresses. I watched Sloane follow that path through the backup server interface. She'd only seen that old archive once during her first week, just boring ET orientation stuff she completely forgot about. She knew the system existed, but never gave it a second thought. That is, until Garrett told her in my supply room that he actually built it himself in 2015. He specifically designed that hidden archive to run entirely on separate infrastructure from the primary mail system, simply because he understood that deleting emails shouldn't erase true institutional records. He built the very trap for the suit who fired him. Suddenly, 3 emails popped up. Kirk had forwarded those messages straight from his company account to a private Gmail address. The careless habit of a guy who wanted easy remote access and never paused to consider the massive forensic consequences. Trashing them from the main system left Garrett's archive copy perfectly intact. Suits never noticed the background plumbing. Kirk clearly didn't know, or just wasn't thinking straight. Those 3 emails were brutally direct. Read in perfect sequence. Stick with me here. They were a direct transfer order to a Delaware Shell Company, detailing exact schedules and cash amounts for their next big money move. Garrett read them off her bright screen with zero expression. "That's enough," he whispered. While I cleaned, they worked in total silence. Picture this with me. The upload finished, and the confirmation flashed. Delivered straight to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Sent simultaneously to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois. Beside me, Sloane stared at the laptop for a while. "My father built this company for 30 years, she whispered. It wasn't an apology, just a heavy truth spoken at nearly 2 in the morning, with only the invisible janitor there to hear her corporate confession. He handed it to me in 2022 because he wasn't well enough anymore. I didn't know they were hollowing it out right under his nose. Not knowing and not looking are different things, I replied. Can you tell them apart, she asked. From my perspective, I said, yes. She stared at me over laptops, financial records, and cold coffee. We both shared that deep exhaustion that only comes after blowing the whistle and changing everything forever. I started packing my bag, my blue work shirt heavily creased from hours sitting there. I finally felt the quiet peace of setting down a massive weight I'd carried alone. Not exactly relief, just a deep stillness. I stood up, gave a nod, and walked out. I walked away, leaving her listening to my heavy boots echoing. She just listened until those boots completely faded into silence. In the sudden silence of that empty room, she finally realized a harsh new reality. She realized she didn't want the room to go quiet. Monday morning hit. Now, let's watch Kirk Ebeling together. He rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, strutting into the boardroom like he had every Monday for 6 years. He carried the sheer arrogance of a man who believed his powerful position was totally untouchable. But 2 strangers were already sitting at his table. A woman wearing a gray suit with a visible federal badge clipped to her lapel. Beside her sat a man holding a legal notepad. Up at the head of the table, Sloane Decker sat totally frozen, hands flat, keeping her expression as professionally composed as possible. Over in the corner stood a completely unfamiliar lawyer, not the usual corporate counsel, but a sharp outsider tightly gripping a dark leather portfolio. Kirk froze in his tracks. The woman spoke. Special agent with the Securities and Exchange Commission, Chicago office. The man beside her, assistant United States attorney. A third investigator was dialed in from the Financial Crimes Unit. That leather portfolio opened up. A heavy-bound audit report slid right in front of Kirk. He looked down at the pages. He knew instantly. You don't spend years running a massive corporate fraud without developing a deep cellular instinct for exactly what your own criminal empire unraveling looks like. The layout of the evidence was unmistakable. It exposed the corporate fraud perfectly, cutting through the system exactly like someone who engineered that dark financial maze would. Those margin notes listed secret offshore accounts that were never supposed to leave the shredder bins I emptied. But they were all perfectly documented. Because the invisible guy knew exactly where to look, Kirk glanced up. Through that expensive glass wall, he looked out into the hallway, and right there I stood quietly with my blue cleaning cart. I stared back without blinking. No smug smile, no dramatic victory. Just the calm, steady gaze of a father who reached the end of a long, hidden road and simply watched the dust finally settle. You and I both know, Kirk finally realized who truly defeated him. Kirk thought paying off the night security boss kept him safe. He figured controlling those camera feeds meant nobody was watching him. But guys in suits miss things. What nobody ever told him was that Sloane quietly tweaked a system layer Kirk never bothered checking. She had actually rerouted those anomaly alerts last year after that document leak. Every warning buzzed straight to her phone. The security guards saw absolutely nothing. Kirk was busy guarding a door Sloane had already slipped quietly right through. The bitter irony definitely wasn't lost on him. That earlier leak she let slide without a fuss, avoided the deep corporate scrutiny he desperately feared. Yet that exact same incident pushed Sloane to make the single, quiet administrative change that brought his whole scheme crashing down. He turned away from the glass. He never even glanced my way again. The federal prosecutor started reading, straight off the preliminary criminal charge sheet. 8 counts, massive securities fraud, money laundering, total breach of fiduciary duty. 3 more charges pending a full forensic audit. Kirk just sat there. Nothing else to do, and he listened because there was nothing left to say. Once he was escorted out, the executives scrambled into an emergency board session. They quickly voted to formally sever Kirk from his high-ranking position, then drafted a public PR statement promising full cooperation with federal investigators. And naturally, they confirmed Sloane would remain chief executive during the ongoing investigation. Just the standard corporate governance playbook whenever serious federal charges land. The executives who used to be Kirk's close buddies were suddenly busy calling their own defense lawyers. Out in the hallway, Patsy caught me pushing my cleaning cart into the supply elevator. She rested a hand on my uniform shoulder. "You done?" she asked quietly. I stared at that heavy closed boardroom door. "Yeah," I told her, "done." I unclipped the cheap plastic badge from my chest and held it a moment. Dropped it right on my cart. Later, company stock plunged 9% when the scandal hit the market. Wall Street always panics in those early hours before the messy facts actually settle down. Before investors figure out if a company hid corruption or if they finally found and scrubbed it out. The market always punishes uncertainty long before it decides to reward honesty. Next morning, Sloane stood confidently before that frantic emergency board session. "We were right," she assured them. "The market corrects itself once our clean financials are finally published. We don't change course." Not a single suit in that room argued. For 24 hours, those executives watched her dismantle a threat. They realized she completely understood what she was doing. Meanwhile, I received my official termination notice from Midwest Facility Services. 3 days later, Decker Meridian restructured their entire janitorial contract, effective immediately. I read that email sitting at my kitchen table, watching my boy Owen eat cereal and sketch on a crumpled permission slip. I shut the laptop, headed down to the office building that afternoon, and emptied my locker. When I finished, I found Patsy quietly waiting for me in the hall. I shook her calloused hand, holding it for just a moment before finally letting go. You know how it is. Nothing felt adequate to say, so neither of us even tried. Later that afternoon, Sloane actually drove out to Garfield Park, parking right outside Owen's school. "You and I know the truth." She claimed she was checking a foundation grant. My kid's school sat on her charity list. An easy cover story for a chief executive dodging reporters after a massive public scandal. She pretended this trip was a totally normal way to spend her afternoon. But deep down, she knew the uncomfortable truth of it all. None of that corporate business was the real reason she showed up today. She just couldn't stop picturing my little boy hunched over his drawing notebook in that coffee shop window, and me, his janitor dad, watching him with a fierce love that blocked out everything else. Ever since that red light on Michigan Avenue, she wanted to ensure my son had what he needed. The boss rarely followed gut feelings unless she could spin them into a boardroom strategy. But today she followed her heart. She stepped out of the front office and slowly crossed the brick courtyard. It was a freezing crisp afternoon. The sky shone that pale Chicago blue of early autumn. I stood by the pickup gate, hands shoved deep into my worn-out work jacket. I watched those doors like always. You and I know uniforms make us invisible, teaching us patience. Waiting isn't a struggle, just another quiet hour to simply get through. I spotted her long before she approached. A quiet second passed, nobody moved. Then Owen busted through the gate, running. His backpack unzipped, a wild crayon drawing flapping loose from the front pocket. He hit the brakes, seeing this corporate woman near his dad, staring at her with the blunt, calm, honest judgment of a kid who hasn't figured out how to hide the things he really wants to know. "Who's this?" he asked. "Someone I worked with," I replied softly. Owen stared at her. "What do you do?" She dropped to his eye level. "I'm a CEO, what's that?" She glanced right up at me. I tried hiding my smirk, but the big boss caught it instantly. The relaxed guard of an invisible guy who finally found something real enough to almost smile about. She looked right back at Owen, realizing her fancy job title meant absolutely nothing to a little kid. Owen clearly figured out the exact same thing on his own. He grabbed my rough hand, leaned against my arm, and watched her with the calm, cautious patience kids give to grown-ups who have just barely proven they aren't going to cause trouble. Not completely welcomed in yet, but not rejected either. 6 weeks later, the shiny new plaque up on the 34th floor read, "Garrett Voss, Director of Internal Compliance." Sloane proposed my new role right after the board approved the company reorganization. I turned it down flat. I don't want a role I didn't earn on my own footing. She promised my new division would report straight to her and the directors. No crooked executives in my way, total freedom. I told her I'd consider it. When she pushed again, I told her the corporate optics looked too complicated. Strike three, she dropped the contract on my desk and walked out in total silence. I signed it the very next morning. Meanwhile, Kirk Eben's fraud case hit the federal courts. 8 criminal counts. Trial officially set for the following March. His lawyers filed useless motions. So, what do you and I take from this? Never underestimate the guy emptying the trash bins after hours. You and I knew the outcome was certain. Company stock bounced back. The independent audit finally came out with totally clean financials. For the first time in 3 years, shares closed 12% above pre-scandal numbers. The market punished secrets, then rewarded our clarity. My old friend Patsy got promoted to Facilities Operations Director. She stopped by my new office this afternoon. She heard. "You remember what floor wax smells like?" she asked me. "Yes," I said. "Good," she replied. "Never forget it." On Friday of week 6, Sloane knocked on my door right at 4:45. It wasn't about another corporate report. Her coat hung over one arm. She stood there the way a person does when they have made a tough choice to speak, but find the delivery harder than expected. "I have 2 extra tickets to the Science Museum this weekend," she offered. "Our foundation sponsors the exhibit. I thought maybe Owen might want to go." "2 tickets," I said. "2, who takes the second?" She just looked at me. I looked right back. Neither of us pretended to be confused about what was happening. "I will call Owen," I smiled, reaching for my jacket. My son gave his answer with the heavy gravity of a serious 7-year-old. "Is the CEO lady coming? Okay. But you have to walk right next to her. I do not want you standing by yourself." That Saturday morning, the Museum of Science and Industry was packed with energetic kids, just full of that loud noise from people genuinely fascinated by what they are seeing. Owen walked right between Sloane and me through the aerospace hall. His little head tilted back, staring at aircraft hanging from the ceiling. And somewhere between the jet engine and space capsule, he reached up without asking, grabbed both our hands, and kept walking. I looked right over my son's head at the brilliant woman beside me. She was looking right back. Words could not add a single thing to what that perfect moment was already doing. We know some people hide not from fear of being seen. They just wait for someone who finally sees the true value underneath.